The town existed in a place where winter was not a season, but a presence. It rested in a shallow valley between low hills, where wind moved freely and snow lingered long after the sun returned. Roads curved gently through it, following the land rather than cutting across it. Wooden houses stood close together, built to share warmth. Smoke from chimneys often rose straight into the air, slow and steady, as if the cold itself were holding its breath. Winter mornings arrived quietly there. Light crept across frost-covered windows. Ice formed lace-like patterns along glass panes. Footsteps on packed snow sounded soft, almost careful, as if the ground were listening. Nothing about the town suggested danger. Blizzards were known, but known things rarely inspire fear. They were part of the rhythm of life, endured, respected, and waited out. People measured time not in days, but in storms past, and storms remembered. No one imagined that one storm would not pass at all. No one imagined that by morning the town would no longer exist in any recognizable form. The day before the blizzard began like many others. Snow lay thick along the streets, compressed into dull white paths by years of passing feet and sleds. The air was cold but calm. Clouds hung low, unmoving, as if fixed in place. The kind of sky that promised snow eventually, but not urgency. Shops opened at their usual hours. Doors creaked softly. Bells chimed once, then fell silent again. Inside, lamps cast warm circles of yellow light onto wooden floors worn smooth by time. People spoke of ordinary things, food supplies, repairs needed before deeper winter. The quiet satisfaction of routines repeated so often they no longer required thought. Outside, wind stirred only slightly, lifting loose snow and letting it settle again. Animals moved slowly, conserving energy. Even the trees seemed patient, their branches bowed but untroubled. By afternoon, the temperature dropped just enough to be noticed. Breath lingered longer in the air. Frost thickened along edges and corners. Still, nothing felt urgent. The first true sign came not with sound, but with absence. The wind stopped entirely. Snowflakes began to fall straight down, perfectly vertical, as if gravity itself had grown heavier. The sky darkened without warning, not gradually, but decisively. Somewhere beyond the hills, something vast was already moving. By late afternoon, the light had changed. It was not yet evening, but the world had taken on a muted, colorless tone, as if someone had quietly turned down the brightness. Whites became dull gray. Shadows softened, losing their edges. Distance grew difficult to judge. The clouds lowered further, pressing down until they seemed close enough to touch. They moved slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, sliding across the sky like a heavy lid being drawn into place. Snow continued to fall, fine, dry, and relentless. At first, it made no sound at all. Then, gradually, a faint whisper emerged as flakes brushed against roofs, fences, and coats. It was a sound so soft it could easily be mistaken for silence itself. People finished their tasks earlier than usual. Doors closed sooner. Shutters were checked, then checked again. Lamps were lit while daylight still lingered, their glow pushing back against the dimness outside. The cold deepened. It crept inward through seams and cracks, settling into walls and floors. Metal stiffened. Wood contracted with quiet, patient clicks. Toward evening, the wind returned. Not suddenly, not violently, but steadily. It arrived as a low breath from the north, moving through the streets without urgency, testing corners and alleys. Snow lifted from the ground and drifted sideways, brushing against windows like pale fingertips. Those who noticed felt a small, unfamiliar tension settle in their chests. This wind did not wander. It advanced. As night approached, the horizon disappeared entirely. Hills vanished into white haze. The edge of the town blurred, then dissolved, leaving only nearby shapes, buildings, fences, trees, standing alone against a vast empty background. Snow thickened, falling faster now, driven at an angle. Drifts began to form where the wind paused, piling against walls and doorways. The sound of the storm grew louder, not in volume, but in presence. It filled every gap. By the time darkness fully arrived, the town was enclosed, cut off from distance, from direction, from anything beyond the reach of a few careful steps. Inside the houses, people listened. Outside, the blizzard was no longer approaching. It had arrived. Night fell without edges. There was no clear moment when day ended and darkness began. Instead, light simply thinned, stretched, and finally disappeared into the storm. The sky and the ground merged into a single shifting surface of white and gray. Snow moved sideways now, fast and sharp. Wind pressed against buildings with a steady force, not striking, not howling, just pushing, as if testing how much the town could withstand. Loose objects rattled briefly, then fell silent beneath accumulating snow. Inside the houses, lamps burned longer than usual. Shadows wavered on walls as flames flickered, responding to subtle changes in pressure. Curtains were drawn tight. Doors were sealed with extra layers of cloth and wood where possible. Sound behaved strangely. The storm swallowed distant noise completely, while nearby sounds, footsteps, breathing, the creak of a beam, seemed unnaturally loud. The wind slipped through cracks with a low, constant hiss, like breath moving through teeth. Outside, familiar landmarks vanished. Fences disappeared beneath rising drifts. Steps were erased almost as soon as they were made. Paths that had been walked for decades dissolved into featureless white. Those who stepped outdoors for final checks moved carefully, counting steps, memorizing angles. They kept one hand extended, brushing against walls to avoid losing direction. Even short distances felt uncertain. The cold sharpened further, turning exposed skin numb within moments. Snow stung like fine grit, carried hard by the wind. Eyes watered, then froze along the lashes. Above it all, the sky pressed lower still. Clouds churned, thick and heavy, reflecting no light at all. Stars were gone. The moon, if it existed, had been sealed away. By late night, the storm's rhythm changed. The wind strengthened, then strengthened again. Drifts rose past windowsills, then higher, smoothing over the shapes of buildings. Roof lines blurred, corners softened. The town began to lose its angles, its lines, its identity. Inside, people waited. They listened to the steady force outside and told themselves the same quiet reassurance winter always demanded, that storms move on, that morning comes, that endurance is enough. None of them could know that the blizzard was not passing through. It was settling in. As the night wore on, time lost its structure. Clocks still moved, but their meaning thinned. Minutes stretched, then folded into one another, marked only by changes in sound and pressure. The storm did not rage. It persisted. That persistence was what made it heavy. Snow fell in dense sheets now, driven nearly horizontal. It struck walls and roofs with a dry, rasping sound, piling higher with every hour. Drifts pressed against doors, compacting under their own weight, sealing entrances from the outside. The wind found new paths. It forced itself into attics, crawled beneath floorboards, slid through the smallest imperfections. Houses groaned softly in response, not in protest, but in adjustment, shifting under the burden of cold and snow. Inside, the air grew still. Heat lingered near lamps and stoves, while the edges of rooms cooled steadily. Breath fogged the air even indoors. Frost traced thin lines along interior walls where warmth could no longer reach. Some people slept in short intervals, waking often, listening. Others remained awake, seated close to heat, watching flames bend and recover as pressure outside changed. The storm seemed to breathe, inhale, exhale, each cycle slower, heavier than the last. Outside, the town was no longer a collection of structures. It was a single shape, buried beneath a moving surface of snow. Roof peaks vanished first, rounded over and smoothed flat. Chimneys shortened, then disappeared entirely, their smoke trapped below the white weight. Streets filled completely, erasing the memory of where they had been. Snow did not simply cover, it consumed. The cold reached a depth that settled into bone and wood alike. Metal stiffened until it no longer rang when struck. Ice formed within walls, spreading quietly, patiently. By the deepest hours of night, the wind reached its full strength. It did not howl, it roared, low, continuous, immense, an unbroken sound that filled every space, leaving no room for thought. It pressed down from all directions at once, flattening the world beneath it. The town endured, as it always had. But endurance assumes there will be something left to endure for. Sometime after midnight, the storm began to change again, not in speed, not in direction, but in density. Snow no longer drifted or swirled. It fell with purpose, thick and heavy, pressing downward as much as sideways. Each new layer compacted the last, turning softness into mass, mass into weight. Roofs carried the burden first. Beams bent slowly, quietly, adjusting as they had been designed to do. Snow slid, then settled again. The sound was subtle, a long, patient creak, followed by stillness. Inside the houses, people felt the pressure without seeing it. Doors grew harder to open, then impossible. Windows dimmed as snow sealed them from the outside, blocking what little light the lamps provided. The boundary between inside and outside thickened until it felt as though the world had shrunk to a few rooms of warmth surrounded by an endless cold. Air became precious. Fires were fed carefully, fuel rationed by instinct rather than plan. Every movement was measured. Every sound seemed to echo more sharply in the enclosed space. Outside, the storm worked steadily. Drifts climbed past second-story windows, then higher, smoothing over walls and angles. Entire buildings became rounded forms beneath the snow, indistinguishable from one another. The town's shape dissolved completely. No streets, no landmarks, no edges. Only a white surface shifting endlessly under the force of the wind. Beneath that surface, the town remained for now. Wood strained. Nails held. Stone resisted. But the storm did not hurry. It had all the time it needed. By the late hours of night, the snow reached a depth few had ever seen. It pressed inward, downward, outward, filling every hollow, every gap. Where warmth met cold, ice formed, thick, clear, unyielding. The storm no longer felt external. It felt close. It felt personal. It felt as though it were not passing over the town, but settling directly on top of it, layer by layer, sealing it away from the world. In the deepest part of the night, awareness narrowed. People no longer listened for changes in the storm. The sound had become constant, absolute, filling every moment so completely that silence itself seemed impossible. Instead, attention turned inward, to breath, to warmth, to the slow passing of seconds. Some sat wrapped in heavy layers, unmoving, conserving energy. Others paced short distances within small rooms, counting steps unconsciously, stopping before walls they knew were there even when they could no longer see them clearly. The air grew heavier. Snow pressed so tightly against buildings that drafts reversed, pushing cold inward rather than letting warmth escape. Frost crept across ceilings, ice thickened along beams and corners, forming clear, glassy growths that caught the light and bent it strangely. Outside, pressure mounted. The storm packed snow into every remaining hollow, forcing it beneath eaves, through vents, into crawl spaces and sheds. Weight increased without pause, without warning. Structures that had stood for decades now carried loads they were never meant to bear. A few sharp sounds echoed briefly, wood shifting, a beam cracking slightly, then were swallowed immediately by the storm. No alarms followed. The wind erased everything. In places where roofs sagged, snow poured inward, filling rooms from the top down. It fell softly at first like dust, then more heavily, piling against furniture and walls. Cold surged in behind it, fast and absolute. Light dimmed. Lamps burned lower as air thinned. Flames flickered, struggled, then steadied again, fed carefully by those who watched them with focused intensity. Outside, the surface of the storm smoothed itself once more. Any sign of collapse, any disturbance, vanished beneath drifting snow within moments. The town's outline, already lost, dissolved further, leaving nothing but gentle rises and shallow depressions where buildings had once stood. Above it all, clouds pressed down, unmoving. The storm had sealed the town not only from the world beyond it, but from the sky itself. By the time the night began its slow, unseen turn toward morning, the town was no longer merely buried, it was entombed. What passed for morning came without light. There was no pale glow behind clouds, no gradual thinning of darkness. The storm allowed no such transitions. Instead, the world remained sealed in the same dim gray it had held through the night, unchanged and unmoved. Inside the buried town, people sensed the shift only by habit. Bodies expected dawn. Thoughts reached for it automatically, searching for the familiar easing of cold, the subtle quieting of wind. But nothing eased, nothing quieted. The storm continued at full weight. Snow still pressed from every direction, packed so tightly that even sound struggled to travel through it. The roar of wind became muted, deeper now, as if heard through layers of earth rather than air. Some tried to mark time. They counted breaths. They fed fires in careful intervals. They spoke a few words aloud, not to communicate, but to confirm that sound still existed. Others remained silent, listening to the subtle signals of the structures around them, the slow creak of wood under pressure, the faint crackle of ice expanding where warmth met cold. Outside, the surface of the snow lay smooth and unbroken, no trace of streets, no sign of rooftops, no indication that a town had ever stood beneath it. The valley itself appeared transformed, filled in and leveled by the storm's patient hand. The hills that once sheltered the town now blended seamlessly into the white expanse, their contours softened until they were barely distinguishable from the sky. Morning passed unnoticed. So did the hours that followed. The storm did not weaken, did not drift, did not tire. It remained fixed over the valley, drawing moisture from distant air, feeding itself endlessly. Inside, air grew thin, heat struggled to hold, ice crept farther inward, snow that had entered through collapsed sections settled deeper, rising slowly but steadily, reducing space, narrowing movement. What little light remained dulled further, reflected endlessly by white surfaces until direction lost meaning. There was no longer an outside and an inside. There was only shelter, shrinking, and cold, advancing. By the time the day should have been ending again, the storm had erased the final distinction between night and day. Time itself seemed buried alongside the town. The second night arrived without announcement, if it could still be called night. The light did not fade. It simply failed to change. The same dim, directionless glow remained, filtered through countless layers of snow and cloud. There was no sky to watch, no horizon to follow. The world existed in a suspended state, neither advancing nor retreating. The storm showed no sign of movement. Wind continued to press downward, steady and immense, as though the air itself had grown heavier. Snow settled, compacted, and hardened, turning from shifting powder into a dense, immovable mass. What had once been soft became rigid, resistant, nearly stone-like. Beneath it, the town endured in fragments. Rooms grew smaller as snow crept inward. Corners disappeared first, then entire walls, their outlines lost beneath smooth white curves. Furniture became obstacles, half buried in drifts. Floors tilted slightly as weight redistributed above. Movement slowed. Every action required calculation. Every breath felt colder than the last. Heat clung only to the closest spaces around dwindling fires, retreating from the edges like a living thing aware of its limits. Sound faded further. The wind, once overwhelming, became distant, muffled by depth and pressure. In its place came quieter noises, the soft settling of snow, the faint crack of ice expanding, the slow, patient compression of space. Outside, the valley had transformed completely. What had been a place of homes, paths, and human presence was now a single, continuous surface, smooth and unbroken. The storm had reshaped the land, filling hollows, leveling rises, erasing memory with methodical care. If anyone had been watching from far away, they would have seen nothing unusual. Just winter. Just snow, just a valley resting beneath a heavy sky. By the deepest hours of this second night, the storm reached a stillness at its center. Wind slowed, not because it weakened, but because there was nothing left to move. Snow had found every place it could settle. The air hung thick and unmoving, locked in place by cold. The town, buried beyond recognition, lay silent beneath it all, waiting for a change that did not come. At some point, the storm stopped announcing itself. The wind no longer roared or even whispered. It simply existed, a vast, unmoving force pressing down from every direction at once. Snow no longer fell in visible motion. It settled, compressed, and hardened in place, locking the world into a single, frozen state. The silence that followed was not calm. It was heavy. It pressed against the ears and the chest, making each breath feel deliberate, measured. Without the wind's voice, other sounds became clearer, too clear. The faint creak of wood under strain, the soft granular shift of snow compacting further. The subtle rhythmic cracking of ice as it expanded and tightened its hold. Beneath the surface, the town continued to change. Walls bowed inward by fractions too small to see, but large enough to feel. Floors dipped slightly as weight redistributed above. In some places, ceilings lowered as snow forced its way through weakened points, spilling inward in slow, quiet cascades. There was no collapse in the dramatic sense, only surrender. Snow filled spaces gently, methodically, sealing rooms from the top down. Objects vanished beneath it one by one. Tables, chairs, shelves, until only the highest points remained visible, and then those too disappeared. Light faded further, scattered, and absorbed by endless white. Even the warm glow of flames struggled to hold shape, bending and shrinking as oxygen thinned and cold advanced. Time became abstract. Without light or sound to mark its passage, moments blurred together. The mind drifted, returned, drifted again. Awareness narrowed to sensation, cold against skin, stiffness in joints, the slow rise and fall of breath. Outside, the valley rested beneath an unbroken surface. Snow had erased not only structures, but evidence. There were no outlines left to suggest where homes had stood or streets had run. The land appeared untouched, as though it had always been this way, as though nothing had ever lived here at all. The storm had not destroyed the town. It had absorbed it. As pressure continued to build, thought slowed. Cold does that. It does not arrive as pain at first, but as distance. Sensations dull, edges blur. The mind conserves what it can, letting less essential thoughts drift away. Memories surfaced without warning. Not vivid scenes, but impressions. Warmth held too long in a room, the sound of footsteps on packed snow, the way light once reflected off windows at certain hours. These recollections appeared briefly, then faded, replaced by the immediate reality of cold and confinement. The storm allowed nothing else. Snow continued its slow work, filling every remaining hollow. Ice thickened in layers, sealing gaps, reinforcing the weight above. What had once been movement became stillness, locked in place. Structures that had resisted longest now bowed fully, their shapes lost beneath the pressure. Roof lines flattened, walls disappeared into smooth curves indistinguishable from the surrounding mass. Inside what little space remained, air grew thin and sharp. Breath crystallized almost instantly, falling as fine frost. Flames weakened, shrinking close to their sources, their light dim and unsteady. Heat no longer spread, it clung. Outside, the valley was silent beyond description. No wind moved across its surface, no snow fell from the sky. The storm had completed its work and now rested, vast and unmoving, like a frozen sea. Above it, clouds remained thick and low, sealing the world away from sun and stars alike. There was no sense of height, no sense of depth, only closeness, pressure, enclosure. The town existed now only as compressed matter beneath the snow, wood, stone, metal, and the faint traces of warmth that had once moved through them. If anyone had passed nearby at that moment, there would have been nothing to notice. No ruins, no signs of struggle. Just winter holding the land in complete, absolute stillness. After what might have been the second or third day, the storm entered a different phase. It did not leave. It paused. The pressure above remained constant, immense, and unmoving. Snow no longer shifted or settled in any noticeable way. The world had reached a state of balance, weight matched by resistance, cold matched by stillness. Nothing changed. That absence of change became its own condition. Beneath the snow, what little space remained held its shape only because there was nowhere left for the weight to go. Ice reinforced every surface, locking structures into their final forms. Movement, even slight, became nearly impossible. The cold reached a depth beyond discomfort. It was no longer felt as temperature, but as presence. It filled the chest, the limbs, the mind. It slowed everything it touched, reducing motion to the bare minimum required to continue. Sound ceased almost entirely. Even the subtle noises of shifting snow and tightening ice faded away. The world existed in a state so quiet it felt unreal, as though sound itself had been removed. Time stretched thin. Without markers, moments lost distinction. Awareness drifted in and out, pulled back only by the need to breathe, to adjust position, to hold on to the smallest trace of warmth. Outside, the valley remained unchanged. Snow lay smooth and untouched, its surface hardened by cold and pressure. It reflected no light, absorbed no sound. The hills blended into the sky, and the sky pressed down until there was no sense of space at all. The storm had not moved on. It had claimed the place and settled in, content to remain. What had once been a town now existed only as a compressed memory beneath layers of winter, silent, sealed, and unseen. Eventually, even the idea of waiting changed. Waiting assumes an end point, relief, release, a return. But beneath the snow, the sense of an ending dissolved. There was only the present moment, stretched thin and held in place by cold. Bodies adjusted to stillness, muscles stiffened, then accepted it. Movement became internal, slow shifts of breath, small changes in posture, measured in inches rather than steps. The mind narrowed further, focusing on balance, on conserving what little warmth remained. The space itself transformed. What had once been rooms became cavities with rounded edges, their angles softened by snow and ice. Walls were no longer vertical, ceilings no longer overhead. Orientation lost meaning. Up and down blurred into a single, pressing closeness. Light, such as it was, flattened everything it touched. It revealed no depth, no distance, only surfaces meeting other surfaces, all white, all cold. Shadows vanished. Contrast disappeared. The world became a single tone, broken only by subtle texture. Outside, the valley held its new form. Snow had settled into a hardened shell, strong enough to support itself, thick enough to resist any intrusion. It was no longer a storm's aftermath. It was a landscape in its own right. Winter had rewritten the land. If the sky still existed above the clouds, it offered no sign. No light filtered through. No warmth followed. The boundary between earth and sky had been erased, replaced by a continuous, enclosing mass. What remained of the town was no longer a place. It was an imprint, a compression of human presence into layers of ice and snow, pressed flat and sealed away. Nothing protruded, nothing hinted at what lay beneath. The storm had not left ruins. It had left silence. Far beyond the valley, the larger world continued. Weather shifted elsewhere. Winds changed direction. Snow fell in other places, melted in others, and returned again in slow cycles. The storm that had settled over the valley loosened its grip on the sky above, even as its weight remained locked in place below. High clouds thinned slightly, not enough to bring light, but enough to suggest motion. Somewhere beyond the sealed horizon, air flowed again. Pressure redistributed. Winter continued its long, indifferent journey across the land. In the valley, nothing responded. The snowpack held firm, hardened into layers of compressed ice and crystal. Its surface bore no mark of time passing. No cracks formed. No settling could be seen. It remained exactly as it had been, smooth, pale, absolute. Beneath it, the town remained unchanged. Cold preserved everything it touched. Wood did not rot. Metal did not rust. Stone did not crumble. All movement had ceased, before decay could begin. What had been warmth was gone. What had been sound was gone. Only matter remained, locked into place by pressure and temperature, suspended between existence and disappearance. If birds passed overhead, they did not pause. If animals crossed the surrounding hills, they did not sense what lay beneath. The snow gave nothing away. It held its secret without effort. The valley had become a blank space on the land, not empty but unreadable. A place where history had been pressed flat and sealed shut, invisible to anything passing above it. Winter does not remember, it only holds. Much later, a change arrived so gently it could not be felt. Light did not break through the clouds, it seeped. A faint brightening passed across the sky, subtle enough to be mistaken for imagination. The gray softened, lifting just enough to suggest that something beyond it still existed. The sun, distant and veiled, traced its path without touching the land below. The snow did not respond. Its surface remained hard and smooth, reflecting the thin light without warmth. No sparkle formed, no melt began. The valley stayed locked in its frozen stillness, but the light continued to come. Each day, if days could still be counted, it returned slightly stronger, slightly higher, lingering a little longer above the clouds. The sky shifted from heavy gray to a paler shade, then back again, repeating the cycle without urgency. Above the valley, seasons were moving. Elsewhere, ice loosened its grip. Water began to flow again in distant places. Trees prepared for change. The world adjusted and continued. And here, nothing yielded. The snowpack resisted warmth completely, its depth too great, its layers too compressed. Cold held firm beneath the surface, guarding what lay below with silent persistence. Shadows began to appear faintly across the valley, barely visible, stretching and retreating as the sun passed overhead. They revealed gentle contours, rounded rises, shallow dips, suggesting a landscape shaped by nature alone. No sign of the town returned. Even as light slowly reclaimed the sky, it revealed nothing new. The place remained erased, its memory sealed beneath ice and time. The blizzard had done more than destroy. It had removed the town from the rhythm of seasons themselves. The change came not as collapse, but as patience. Light continued its quiet return day after day, lingering a little longer each time. The sky softened further, lifting higher above the valley, though it never fully cleared. The sun remained distant, filtered, cautious. At the surface, the snow began to change its character. What had once been loose became granular. What had been powder turned dense, then compacted further under its own weight. The topmost layer hardened into a crust strong enough to hold shape, to resist even the faint warmth drifting down from above. The valley no longer looked like a place shaped by weather. It looked like terrain, gentle rises settled into permanence. Shallow depressions froze into form. The smooth surface took on a subtle complexity, wind-sculpted patterns, faint ripples, delicate ridges formed over time. Beneath it all, the town remained untouched, preserved. Time did not reach it. Air did not reach it. Light did not reach it. Everything that had existed there stayed exactly as it had been sealed, unchanged, unweathered, waiting without awareness. Above, life adjusted. Animals learned new paths around the valley, skirting its edges without reason they could name. Snow accumulated elsewhere, melted elsewhere, flowed into streams and rivers far away. Here, nothing flowed. Spring arrived in distant regions, then summer, Then the slow return of cold again. The valley remained constant through it all, its snowpack too deep to surrender, its core locked in cold older than memory. The blizzard was no longer a recent event. It had become history, one written without witnesses. Over time, maps changed. Lines shifted slightly, names faded from use. New routes were drawn around obstacles that no longer needed explanation. The valley remained marked only as high ground, heavy snow, unreliable passage. No one asked why. Places that cannot be used are rarely remembered. Those who passed nearby felt an unspoken hesitation. The air above the valley carried a deeper cold, even in warmer months. Snow lingered longer there, refusing to melt at the same pace as elsewhere. The ground beneath felt firm, unyielding, as though layered with stone rather than ice. Nothing grew at its center. Wind traced the surface, reshaping it in small, careful ways. Patterns formed and vanished. The land adjusted slowly, patiently, to its frozen burden. The town did not return. No outline emerged. No corner broke through. No object rose to the surface. The snowpack protected what lay beneath with complete indifference, neither revealing nor destroying, simply holding. Seasons continued their slow rotation above. Winter came again, adding fresh layers. Summer followed, failing to reach the depth where anything could change. Each cycle reinforced the stillness below, pressing history further out of reach. The valley became a pause in the landscape, a place passed over, a place avoided without knowing why. What had once been voices, movement, warmth, routine, these things left no echo strong enough to travel upward through so much cold. The blizzard had not only erased the town, it had removed its name from the living world. Years settled into one another without distinction. Above the valley, weather continued its endless work. Snow fell and melted elsewhere. Rivers shifted their paths. Forests crept slowly across open ground. Time moved forward in small, quiet steps. Here, it did not. The snowpack held its depth with remarkable consistency. New layers fused seamlessly with old ones, compressing into a dense, pale mass that resisted change. Even in the warmest stretches, the surface softened only briefly before refreezing, sealing itself again. Beneath it all, the town remained intact in ways the world above could no longer imagine. Cold preserved shape and structure. Wood stayed dry and pale. Metal kept its form. Stone held steady. Nothing decayed in the usual sense. There was no air to carry moisture, no warmth to encourage collapse. The town existed as a frozen cross-section of a single moment, not ruin, not dust, simply stopped. Snow remembers by holding. It does not sort, judge, or erase selectively. It presses everything equally into stillness, preserving without intention. What lies beneath remains because the cold allows it to remain. Above, no sign hinted at this quiet preservation. The valley appeared empty, peaceful even. Wind traced gentle lines across its surface. Light shifted across it during the day, casting soft shadows that moved without consequence. Nothing suggested that beneath that calm surface rested an entire human world, sealed whole and silent. The blizzard had not taken it away. It had placed it somewhere unreachable. At some point, silence stopped feeling temporary. It settled into permanence, like the snow itself, no longer something that followed sound, but something that existed on its own. The valley no longer waited for noise to return. It had adjusted to its absence. Above the frozen surface, The air moved gently now. Winds passed over without resistance, slipping across the hardened crust as though it were bare stone. Snow that fell in later years did not sink deeply. It rested briefly, then was carried away again, unable to join the immense weight below. The surface remained unchanged, smooth, pale, unbroken. Beneath it, the town stayed exactly as it had been sealed. Nothing shifted, nothing settled further. Pressure and cold held everything in balance, creating a stillness so complete it felt separate from time itself. The idea of before and after lost meaning here. There was only the moment of burial, endlessly extended. Elsewhere, the world accumulated stories, growth, loss, rebuilding, forgetting. But this place gathered none of that. It existed outside narrative, outside progress, outside memory. Even the land around it seemed to acknowledge this difference. Animals crossed quickly, rarely pausing. Birds did not linger. Sound carried poorly here, flattened and absorbed by the dense cold beneath the surface. The valley did not invite attention. It did not warn. It simply remained. The blizzard that had erased the town was long gone from weather records, from spoken memory, from all but the most distant archives, yet its work endured, preserved with absolute fidelity beneath layers of winter. Nothing rose to challenge it, nothing disturbed its hold. Silence had become the final condition. Long after the blizzard itself had vanished from memory, the valley remained unchanged. Snowstorms came and went above it, ordinary and unremarkable, their effects erased each spring. Rain fell on distant hills. Rivers swelled, then settled back into their channels. The world practiced its familiar patterns over and over again. The valley did not respond. Its surface stayed firm and pale, resisting the cycles that shaped everything else. Even during warmer years when snow retreated from nearby slopes, it lingered here, compressed, ancient, and unmoved. Those who traveled nearby felt the difference without understanding it. The air felt heavier. Sound carried strangely, thinning and flattening before it could travel far. Footsteps across the surface produced a dull, muted tone, as if the ground absorbed not only vibration, but intention. No one lingered long. There was nothing to see, nothing to do, nothing that invited explanation. The place offered no landmarks, no resources, no shelter. It simply existed, quietly refusing participation. Beneath that surface, the town remained intact in its frozen stillness. Rooms waited exactly as they had been sealed. Objects rested where they had last been left. Paths and streets remained pressed into memory, rather than land, their outlines preserved in negative space beneath the weight above. Cold protected everything, not kindly, not cruelly, just thoroughly. Time passed without leaving marks. What had once been an overnight disaster slowly became a geological event, its outcome measured not in lives or loss, but in layers and pressure and depth. The blizzard had ended in hours. Its consequences would last for ages. Eventually the valley stopped producing echoes. Sound entered it and went nowhere. Voices, footsteps, even the crack of shifting ice all seemed to sink straight down, absorbed by the dense mass beneath the surface. There was no return, no reflection, only quiet continuation. The land had learned how to hold silence. Wind skimmed across the hardened snow without disturbance. It did not carve deeply, did not expose what lay below. The surface resisted, holding its shape with the stubbornness of compressed time. Nothing revealed the town. No unevenness suggested streets. No subtle rise marked rooftops. The weight had pressed everything into uniformity, smoothing memory into a single unbroken plane. Above, life adapted fully. Paths avoided the valley, stories drifted away, names disappeared. What remained was a blank space filled with snow and nothing else. The blizzard had succeeded completely, not by force alone, but by duration. It had stayed long enough for resistance to become irrelevant, for preservation to replace destruction, for silence to harden into permanence. Beneath the snow, the town waited without awareness. Above it, the world no longer waited for anything. Time continued its work without observation. Years folded into decades, decades into something less precise. The valley did not record these changes. It offered no markers, no growth rings, no erosion lines to count. The snowpack held steady, its depth a constant, its cold a barrier against the usual signs of age. Above it, the sky learned new patterns. Clouds thinned and thickened. Light traced arcs across seasons. Storms passed, leaving nothing behind. The valley accepted each change and returned nothing. Beneath the surface, the town remained untouched, not frozen in a dramatic sense, but held, suspended at the exact point where motion had stopped. Doors stayed closed. Objects stayed where they had last been placed. The air inside those sealed spaces did not circulate. It simply existed, locked in place by cold and pressure. Nothing faded, nothing advanced. It was not preservation meant to be discovered. There was no promise of return, no future unearthing waiting patiently ahead. The town was not resting. It was concluded. Above, travelers came and went, unaware they crossed over a boundary more absolute than stone or water. Their footsteps left no lasting mark. The surface accepted them briefly, then erased them without effort. The valley asked nothing of those who passed. It did not need recognition. It did not need explanation. It simply remained, holding what it had taken, while the rest of the world moved on without looking back. In time, the valley developed its own quiet order. Wind approached it differently, slowing as it crossed the frozen surface, as if sensing resistance beneath. Snow that fell there no longer drifted freely. It settled briefly, then slid away, unable to find purchase on the hardened crust below. The land had learned how to stay as it was. Cold lingered longer in this place than anywhere around it. Even during the height of warmer seasons, when nearby ground softened and darkened, the valley held its pale color. It reflected the sky rather than absorbing it, giving nothing back. Below, the town remained sealed. Pressure held everything in balance. Wood supported by ice, stone braced by compacted snow, empty spaces preserved by cold so deep it felt permanent. Nothing collapsed further, because nothing could move. The moment of erasure had become a state of being. The valley no longer felt abandoned. It felt complete. Silence here was not absence, but condition, a stable form, maintained by layers of winter stacked patiently over time. No sound tried to return. No motion asked to resume. What had once been human life no longer contrasted with the land. It had been absorbed into it. At some unknowable point, the blizzard's work reached its final form, not because anything changed, but because nothing ever would again. The valley settled into equilibrium, a balance between weight and resistance, cold and compression. Snow and ice fused into a single body, layered so deeply that the distinction between storm and ground no longer mattered. This was no longer aftermath. It was architecture. The surface bore the quiet markings of long exposure, faint wind-carved lines, subtle undulations where air moved more often, shallow depressions where snow once paused before hardening. These details shifted slowly over years, but never deeply enough to disturb what lay beneath. Below, the town existed as structure without function. Walls supported nothing, doors led nowhere, rooms held air that had not moved in ages. Everything remained exactly as it had been sealed, not alive, not decaying, simply held in place by cold beyond reach. There was no pressure building toward release, no tension waiting to snap. The storm had finished its work so completely that even the concept of change had been removed. Above, the sky passed through its cycles without awareness. Clouds crossed, light shifted. Weather arrived and departed. None of it reached the depth where history lay pressed flat and silent. The blizzard had not only erased the town, it had given the valley a permanent shape, one built not from stone or earth, but from time itself, frozen into place. Nothing ever returned to the valley, not sound, not warmth, not memory. Even the smallest signs of disturbance failed to last. Footprints faded almost as soon as they appeared. Wind-smoothed lines erased themselves overnight. Snow fell and was carried away again, leaving the surface as it had always been, clean, pale, undisturbed. The land had closed. Whatever entered this place did not stay long, and whatever lay beneath it would never rise again. Beneath the hardened snow, the town remained exactly where it had been sealed. Not hidden in the sense of secrecy, but locked away by conditions too absolute to challenge. The depth was too great, the cold too complete, the pressure too balanced. Nothing pushed upward, nothing broke through. Time itself seemed to slow as it passed overhead, as though even it sensed there was nothing left to alter here. The valley did not resist change. It simply no longer responded to it. Elsewhere, landscapes aged. Here the land held a single moment forever. The blizzard had not needed to return. Its work was done. Long after the last person who remembered the storm was gone, the valley remained. It did not age in the way other places did. Grass never claimed it, water never carved it. The ground beneath the snow stayed locked in the same position it had held since the night the blizzard settled in. Winters passed over it like gentle echoes of the original storm. They added little, took nothing away. Snow fell, rested briefly, then joined the greater mass below, fusing seamlessly into layers already dense beyond counting. Each year made the stillness thicker, more complete. The valley became colder than the air around it. Even in milder seasons, a chill lingered there, rising faintly from the surface, subtle enough to be dismissed, persistent enough to be felt. Those who crossed it noticed the cold first in their breath, then in their bones. They moved faster without knowing why. Beneath them, the town lay unchanged. Walls still stood where walls had stood. Streets still ran where streets had run. Spaces remained defined even if no air moved through them. The structure of human life stayed intact, preserved in exact detail by the cold that refused to let time proceed. Nothing stirred, not decay, not collapse, not growth. The silence beneath the valley was deeper than absence. It was permanence. Eventually, even the idea of thaw became unfamiliar here. Elsewhere, winter loosened its hold each year. Ice cracked and flowed. Snow retreated into shadow and memory. The world practiced release again and again. The valley did not. Warmth arrived at its surface and stopped. It spread thinly, hesitated, then withdrew, leaving no trace behind. The depth below remained untouched, insulated by layers so dense they felt immune to change. The snow had learned how to endure heat without surrender. Above it, light passed across the land in long arcs, tracing seasons that meant nothing here. Days lengthened and shortened. Shadows shifted. The surface reflected it all without response. The valley became a place where cycles ended. Beneath that unyielding cover, the town stayed fixed at the exact point where motion had ceased. The moment of rupture did not fade with time. It remained perfectly intact, protected by cold that never relaxed its grip. Nothing aged, nothing softened, nothing dissolved into something else. The blizzard had not merely erased a town, it had created a place where melting itself no longer applied. Years added themselves quietly to the valley. They did not announce their arrival. They did not mark their passing. Each one settled gently onto the last, like snowflakes that never melted, only fused. The surface thickened almost imperceptibly, not in height, but in certainty. Pressure deep below adjusted with slow precision, redistributing itself until everything once again reached balance. Ice reinforced weak points. Snow crystal locked against snow crystal, creating a structure stronger than stone and more patient than earth. The valley became heavier than it appeared. Beneath that weight, the town existed in perfect stillness. Time did not advance there. It did not retreat either. It simply stopped, held in place by cold and compression. Objects remained suspended in their last positions, untouched by decay or collapse. The absence of movement was complete. Nothing shifted when the ground above cooled or warmed slightly. Nothing responded when distant earthquakes passed through the region. Their vibrations softened and absorbed long before reaching the depth where the town lay. It was as if the blizzard had pressed the town not only into the earth, but out of the world's motion altogether. Above, history continued. Below, history ended. The valley carried that ending without effort, without strain, and without sound. Names changed everywhere else. Rivers were renamed, roads rerouted, settlements rose, fell, and were replaced by others. Maps updated themselves to reflect new priorities, new boundaries, new understandings of the land. The valley kept none of this. It remained unnamed, not because no one had tried, but because no name held. Words require memory, and memory requires return. Nothing returned from this place with enough meaning to anchor a name. The snow endured. Layer after layer remained intact, compacted into a pale mass so deep it resisted even curiosity. Those who studied the region from afar noted the anomaly, unusual cold retention, abnormal snow depth, but explanations remained abstract, technical, distant. No one dug, no one lingered. Beneath that enduring weight, the town stayed exactly as it had been left, not abandoned, not destroyed, simply removed from time's sequence. If the snow could be lifted away, room by room would appear intact, preserved in precise stillness. But the snow had no intention of lifting. It had learned permanence too well. Above, generations came and went. Below, a single night stretched endlessly, frozen and complete. The blizzard had outlasted every attempt to remember it. No one ever measured how deep the snow truly was. Instruments failed long before reaching the lowest layers. Drills froze. Probes bent or stalled. Their progress slowed to nothing by pressure and cold that resisted intrusion. Numbers remained estimates, approximations written down, and then set aside. The depth did not invite precision, it invited acceptance. Above the surface, the valley appeared simple, flat, pale, quiet. Below it, complexity remained sealed in layers no tool could easily reach. Snow pressed into ice, ice into something denser still, forming a barrier that behaved less like weather and more like geology. Beneath that barrier, the town remained unchanged. Every space held its shape. Every structure stayed exactly where it had been fixed. The cold preserved detail without caring what that detail meant. Human presence was reduced to matter and position, nothing more. The depth did not grow dramatic. It grew sufficient, enough to ensure nothing would ever rise back through it. The blizzard had not needed to bury the town deeply, only deeply enough. Once that threshold was reached, permanence followed naturally, effortlessly. Above, the land rested. Below, the past remained pressed flat, unreachable, and complete. In time, winter stopped being an event here. It became the foundation. The valley no longer experienced cold as a condition that arrived and departed. Cold was the structure everything rested upon, the base layer that supported all others. Snow and ice were not coverings anymore. They were the ground itself. The surface took on a quiet authority. It did not crack loudly. It did not shift dramatically. It held firm and patient, responding to pressure with slow internal adjustments too subtle to notice. The valley behaved like something ancient, settled into a form that required no maintenance. Above it, weather came and went without effect. Storms passed overhead, their snow briefly whitening the surface before being carried away or fused seamlessly into what was already there. Sunlight touched the snow and withdrew, leaving no trace behind. Beneath it all, the town remained suspended, not hidden in darkness, but locked in a state without light at all. Rooms held their shape in perfect stillness. Objects remained arranged exactly as they had been at the final moment, preserved not by intention, but by conditions so complete they allowed no alternative. Nothing called out from below. Nothing waited to be found. The blizzard had not created a ruin. It had laid a foundation so absolute that everything built upon it, time, weather, forgetting, rested without disturbance. The valley stood as proof that some moments do not fade. They simply become ground. History requires movement. It depends on change, on events leaving traces that can be followed, interpreted, retold. In the valley, none of that applied anymore. The land had settled into a state beyond record. Nothing here marked time. The snow did not crack with age. Ice did not show lines of stress or release. The surface remained smooth, shaped only by wind that skimmed across it without carving deeply enough to matter. Below, the town existed outside chronology. It had no before and no after, only a single, continuous present held in place by cold and weight. What had once been hours and days stretched into a permanent condition, neither advancing nor receding. Even the earth beneath seemed to adjust. The ground supported the mass above without protest, distributing pressure slowly, evenly. The valley became stable in a way that discouraged disturbance, as though it had learned how to protect what lay below by refusing to move at all. Above, centuries might pass unnoticed. Generations might rise, settle elsewhere, and fade away. Knowledge would change. Language would shift. Memory would thin. The valley would remain the same, not forgotten, not remembered, simply unchanged. The blizzard had created a stillness deeper than history, one that did not ask to be told, because it had nowhere to go. Over time, the cold learned the shape of the valley. It settled into every contour, every depth, every hidden angle beneath the snow. It no longer moved as weather does. It behaved more like terrain, fixed, reliable, unquestioned. Temperature here was not measured by degrees, it was measured by consistency. The surface never softened enough to darken. The interior never warmed enough to shift. The boundary between snow and ice blurred until it no longer mattered which was which. Everything became part of the same structure, locked together by pressure and patience. Beneath that structure, the town remained exact. Not symbolic, not abstract, exact. Every wall stood where it had been sealed. Every space retained its volume. The cold preserved geometry as faithfully as it preserved matter. Nothing bent further, nothing relaxed. The moment of erasure was complete and unaltered. Above, wind traced familiar paths across the valley, finding no resistance, leaving no marks that lasted. Snowflakes that landed here joined a system already finished, their individuality lost instantly to the mass below. The valley no longer responded to climate. Climate responded to it. Air cooled slightly as it passed over. Snow behaved differently here than elsewhere. The land influenced weather rather than the other way around. The blizzard had ended long ago, but the cold it left behind had learned how to stay. Those who crossed the valley learned quickly that the ground did not behave like snow. Footsteps did not sink in the usual way. They pressed down briefly, then resisted, as if meeting something solid just beneath the surface. The sound was dull, muted, absorbed before it could echo. It felt less like walking on winter, and more like walking on something finished. The surface did not welcome weight. It tolerated it. Tracks faded within moments, smoothed away by wind, or erased by the slow, subtle settling of the crust. Nothing lasted long enough to suggest passage. Nothing lingered long enough to become evidence. The valley accepted contact without acknowledgement. Beneath that unyielding surface, the town remained locked in exact stillness. No vibration traveled deep enough to disturb it. No pressure from above reached the depth where anything could respond. The layers had learned how to protect what lay below by refusing to transmit change. Above, travelers adjusted their pace unconsciously. They crossed quickly, without pause, without curiosity. Something in the land discouraged stillness, discouraged attention. It was not fear, it was finality. The blizzard had not only erased the town, it had created a surface that refused footsteps to matter. Curiosity rarely lingered in the valley. Those who approached it felt no pull to investigate further, no quiet insistence that something lay beneath. The place offered no hints, no irregularities, no suggestion of depth beyond what could be seen. It presented itself as complete, finished, and uninterested in attention. Questions dissolved quickly here. The surface revealed nothing that invited explanation. It did not crack open. It did not reveal layers. It did not offer fragments or clues. Snow and ice blended into a single, uninterrupted presence that discouraged interpretation. Beneath it, the town remained perfectly intact, not hidden in the way secrets are hidden, waiting to be uncovered, but sealed in a way that made uncovering irrelevant. The conditions were absolute enough to remove the very idea of discovery. Nothing called upward, nothing pressed outward. Above, the world learned to pass by without wondering. Paths curved slightly around the valley. Journeys shortened their crossing. Attention shifted elsewhere, toward places that responded, changed, invited meaning. The valley asked for none of that. It held its silence without effort, allowing curiosity itself to drift away and fade, just like everything else that tried to remain. In the end, the blizzard left behind only one thing, not destruction, not warning, not memory. It left certainty. The valley became a place where nothing needed to be explained. It did not threaten. It did not invite. It simply existed, complete and unquestioned, holding its silence as naturally as stone holds weight. Beneath the snow, the town rested exactly as it had been sealed, not suffering, not waiting, resting. Cold had done what time usually does. It had stopped things from moving forward. But unlike time, it did not blur or erode. It preserved with precision, holding every space in balance, every structure in quiet agreement with the pressure around it. Above, the world no longer noticed. The valley passed into the background of landscapes, mentioned rarely, crossed briefly, and forgotten immediately. No stories clung to it, no legends formed. There was nothing dramatic enough to remember. That was the blizzard's final gift. It erased without spectacle. It removed without remainder. It created a place where endings did not echo, and therefore did not disturb the world beyond them. Nothing ever broke the silence of the valley. Not thunder, not wind, not the slow turning of seasons. Sound entered and disappeared, as if absorbed by something far deeper than snow. Even the rare crack of shifting ice faded instantly, leaving no echo behind, no reminder that it had ever existed. The surface remained unchanged, smooth, pale, and unresponsive. Snowflakes that landed there vanished into the larger mass, losing their individuality at once. Rain that fell at the edges never reached the center. Water diverted itself elsewhere, choosing paths that still allowed movement. The valley had no need for movement. Beneath the frozen weight, the town stayed exactly as it had been sealed, unchallenged, untouched. The cold preserved not only matter but order. Nothing drifted out of place. Nothing softened. Nothing surrendered. It was as if the land itself had agreed to hold that moment forever. Above, the world continued without noticing the agreement. People lived, traveled, and changed. Stories formed and dissolved. Places rose, fell, and were replaced. All of it passed over the valley without consequence. The blizzard's work remained complete. Silence did not return here. It never left. There was no moment when the story ended, no final sound, no last collapse, no clear dividing line between what had been and what would never be again. The valley simply continued as it was. Snow held its shape. Ice kept its balance. Cold remained steady and unchallenged. Everything that needed to be finished had already been finished long ago, in the quiet hours when the blizzard settled and refused to leave. Beneath the surface, the town stayed exactly where it had been pressed into stillness. Not remembered, not mourned, not recovered, just held. Above it, the sky passed through countless variations, light and cloud, storm and calm, without ever touching what lay below. The land accepted each change and gave nothing in return. The blizzard had erased the town in a single night. What followed was not aftermath, but permanence, a place where nothing needed an ending because nothing would ever begin again. Some places carry stories, others carry only weight. The valley belonged to the second kind. Nothing there invited retelling. No detail rose to the surface asking to be interpreted or remembered. The land offered no fragments, no clues, no quiet mysteries to assemble into meaning. It remained smooth, resolved, and complete. Beneath the snow, the town existed without voice. Not silent in the way something waits to be heard, but silent in the way stone is silent. Its presence did not seek acknowledgement. It did not ask to be uncovered. It simply remained where it had been sealed, unchanged and sufficient. Cold continued its steady work, not actively, not aggressively, just continuously. It held everything in exact balance, preventing motion so completely that even the idea of movement felt misplaced. The moment of erasure stayed intact, preserved with a precision no memory could match. Above, language shifted, words came and went, meaning softened and changed. New expressions replaced old ones. The valley did not take part in this evolution. It required no description and accepted none. What had happened there stayed unsaid, not because it was unknown, but because it no longer needed to be known. The blizzard had done more than erase a town. It had removed the need for a story. The valley did not change its mind. It did not reconsider what it held or loosen its grip with time. Snow and ice remained joined in quiet agreement, their balance maintained without effort. The surface stayed pale and firm, offering no indication of depth or history. It existed simply as it was. Above it, light came and went, tracing familiar arcs across the sky. Clouds gathered and thinned. Wind passed over without disturbance. Everything moved except the valley itself. Beneath the surface, the town stayed fixed in exact stillness, not hidden, not waiting, just there, preserved by conditions too complete to allow alteration. The cold kept every shape intact, every space defined, every moment held at the point where motion had ceased. Nothing pushed upward, nothing decayed downward. The valley had become a place where the present never replaced the past, because the past had never been allowed to leave. Elsewhere, the world continued to change. Here, it simply remained. What followed could not be called an aftermath. Aftermath implies debris, traces, a lingering disorder that invites repair or understanding. The valley offered none of that. It presented a smooth continuation, winter extending itself indefinitely without rupture or regret. Snow became memory's substitute. Where recollection failed, layers remained. Each winter added its quiet weight, not changing the valley's shape so much as reaffirming it. The surface grew subtly denser, subtly firmer, until it seemed less like a covering and more like an answer. Below, the town rested beyond reach, not because it was hidden well, but because nothing above required its return. The cold maintained a perfect stillness, protecting detail without preserving meaning. What had been human life stayed intact in form alone, disconnected from story or consequence. Time passed overhead like a shadow. Centuries could have slipped by unnoticed here. The valley did not register them. It did not respond. It did not mark them. It held the same pale expression it had held since the storm settled and refused to leave. The blizzard's work was not dramatic. It was complete. The valley reached a point where it needed nothing more. It did not require attention to remain as it was. It did not depend on weather, on season, on memory. Everything necessary for its continuation already existed within the balance of cold, pressure, and stillness. Snow and ice supported one another perfectly. The surface neither cracked nor softened. It absorbed the passing of years without reaction, as though time itself slid across it, without friction. Nothing accumulated that did not already belong. Below, the town remained complete in its suspension. Every space held its shape. Every structure rested in equilibrium. There was no strain, no slow failure waiting to happen. The conditions were exact enough to prevent change in any direction. It was not decay held back. It was decay made unnecessary. Above, the world learned unconsciously that this place offered no exchange. Nothing could be taken from it. Nothing could be added to it. The valley stood outside the flow of cause and effect. The blizzard had not left behind destruction. It had left behind a place that needed nothing at all. Eventually, there were no witnesses left, not because anyone was turned away, but because no one arrived with eyes that lingered. The valley existed beyond interest, beyond necessity. Roots bypassed it naturally, as water flows around stone without decision. The snow did not mind. It continued to hold its shape, accepting light and shadow without reaction. Each year's cold folded gently into the last, reinforcing the quiet agreement that nothing here would move again. Beneath the surface, the town remained exact. The spaces between walls still existed. The lines of streets still ran their courses. The order of things, placed, left, sealed, persisted without memory of why it mattered. Preservation did not require awareness. Above, generations passed without ever knowing they had passed over a boundary. Their footsteps left no imprint. Their presence added no weight. The valley accepted them briefly, then returned to itself unchanged. The blizzard had done more than erase a town. It had created a place that did not require witnesses to remain real. At some distant point, even the idea of long ago lost meaning here. The valley no longer belonged to any timeline that could be traced or measured. Snow and ice had settled into a state so stable that nothing marked when it began. The blizzard was no longer an event in the past. It was a condition that simply existed. The surface carried a quiet authority. It did not shift beneath the sky. It did not answer to warmth or storm. It remained pale and composed, shaped only by the slowest movements of air, movements too gentle to disturb what lay below. Beneath that unbroken surface, the town remained complete, not preserved for discovery, not hidden for revelation, just held. The cold maintained everything in exact balance, preventing collapse as thoroughly as it prevented decay. The moment of erasure stayed intact, sealed away from change by conditions that required no effort to maintain. Above, the world had forgotten how to measure this place. Maps did not mark it clearly. Stories did not mention it. Memory had no reason to return. The valley existed without reference, without explanation, without future. The blizzard had not passed into history. It had passed into forever. The stillness of the valley eventually grew larger than the valley itself. It spread outward in subtle ways, not as cold, not as snow, but as an influence difficult to describe. Weather patterns shifted gently around it. Winds bent their paths without urgency. Storms lost strength as they crossed its edges, as if recognizing a place already complete. The land had settled into certainty. Nothing needed reinforcement. Nothing required repair. Snow and ice supported one another in a quiet equilibrium, layered so deeply that even the earth beneath seemed content to remain exactly where it was. Beneath the surface, the town rested without tension, not pressing upward, not collapsing inward, simply existing at the depth where change no longer reached. The structures held their shapes because nothing demanded otherwise. Cold kept every surface exact. Pressure kept every space defined. The moment of erasure remained whole, unbroken by time or attention. Above, the world continued to move, cities growing, shrinking, shifting, seasons repeating with gentle variation, histories accumulating and fading again. All of it passed near the valley without touching it. The stillness did not compete with motion. It outlasted it. The blizzard's final work was not the snow. It was the silence wide enough to hold everything beneath it, forever. In the end, the valley did not feel tragic. Tragedy belongs to memory, to voices that speak of what was lost and what might have been. Here, memory had no place to settle. The land had accepted its condition too completely for sorrow to remain. Snow lay calm and unbroken. Cold held steady. The world above continued, unaware and unaffected, moving forward in countless directions, while this single place stayed exactly as it was. Beneath the surface, the town rested in perfect stillness, not destroyed, not scattered, not reduced to fragments, whole. Every space remained as it had been sealed on that night when the blizzard arrived and refused to leave. The moment of erasure stayed intact, protected not by walls or distance, but by conditions so absolute they required no maintenance. The storm itself was long gone. Its winds had moved on, its clouds had thinned, its snow had stopped falling, but its work endured. The blizzard had erased an entire town overnight, not with violence or noise, but with patience, layer by layer, breath by breath, until nothing remained above to suggest what lay below. The valley did not ask to be remembered. It did not ask to be found. It simply remained holding a single night forever, while the rest of the world learned to forget. And so the snow stayed smooth, the silence stayed complete, and the town stayed exactly where the blizzard left it. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If you're listening as the day fades or as night settles in, allow the quiet of this place to soften your thoughts. Let the stillness rest with you for a while. If this story helped you relax, unwind, or drift toward sleep, you're welcome to return to it any time. And when you're ready, simply breathe slowly and let the silence carry you onward.